All right, hey everybody. Into the afternoon of day 2 of AWE. Is everybody having a good conference? I think it's one of the best we've had yet. It's really nice to have 3,000 people here instead of 6,000. And it's intimate and interesting, and the conversations are amazing. So glad you're all here. We've got a really cool session on talking about what happens when technology meets something useful, right? So technology in medicine, and these guys are doing incredible work. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and we'll talk for 20 and take some questions and learn some stuff. So cool. Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you. You just turn this off? Okay. Is that all right? Thank you. Yeah. Cheers. How's my audio? I'm going to drop the mask for a second here if everybody's all right with that. Hi, I'm Gabe Jones, co-founder CEO of a company called Proprio out of Seattle. And today we're going to submit to you a thesis around the future of medicine. We call it super medicine. What does that mean? It means we're very fortunate to live at a time when all these technologies are coming together at the same time, along with really tremendous capability of practitioners, like Dr. Saigal, who I'll introduce in a second. So our thesis is, and we submit this to you for your consideration today, that this is the best time to be working at the intersection of technology, engineering, and a field like medicine. So we'll talk about the history of medicine. A lot of progress has been made, but we think this is the exact time to get involved, and we'll explain to you why we think so in a second. So first, let me introduce Dr. Rajiv Saigal. He is most definitely a practicing excellent physician working in the spine space, so really complex anatomy. But simply to say that he's a very accomplished physician does not encompass everything that he's done and all that he is. He's also got a PhD. He was at Harvard, MIT. He's very much in our minds a physician, scientist, engineer. And why that's not only just impressive, lots of acronyms after the name, he's certainly earned it. It's that this is the right time for people like Dr. Saigal to be working with us, with technologists, to solve these really big problems. And that's what we're very excited about. It's this very unique moment in time when all these things can come together at once. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rajiv.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabe. So I'll start by asking a simple question, which is, do we know everything we need to know about surgery? And the answer, as you might guess, is of course not. There's still a lot to be discovered. Surgery is exciting because it's a field of medicine that uses a lot of technology and always has. And it's certainly a field that is certainly in need of more technology. My field is neurosurgery and spine. And within this domain, there's over 2 million surgeries happening per year, of which about 400,000 are spinal fusion surgeries. These are some of the more complex types of surgeries that we do where we're implanting hardware, basically screws and rods, inside of a patient. And that requires a lot of different tools to do these as safely as possible. So these are also very expensive surgeries, very expensive to the healthcare system, very expensive to insurers. Spine surgeries often are also just not a single event. Patients frequently will come back in the future and may need a revision or something corrected. And when we do have to do revision surgeries, those may cost as much as $100,000 per surgery to the system. And currently there's about 9,000 of these per year, bringing the total cost to over $1 billion per year just for revision surgery. There are different techniques that we use when we implant screws and rods, basically hardware inside of a patient in order to stabilize their spine. These are the two main ways that we use today. One is called freehand, where a surgeon is relying on his or her knowledge of the anatomy to place a screw safely into the spine while avoiding important critical anatomic structures nearby. The other is navigation, where we usually involve some imaging, a CT scan, lesser common an MRI scan ahead of time, where we are using that navigation inside of the operating room to try to guide our movements and again accomplish the same technique safely. So sometimes it's helpful to think about things in terms of a case. And so I want to bring you this case example. This was a patient I treated many years ago. This was a 40-year-old female patient who had a history of scoliosis. And for those of you who don't know, basically scoliosis just means your spine is curved. And she was born like that, and it progressed in her teenage years, which is common for this problem. And 25 years before she met me, another surgeon had fixed the curvature in the middle part of her back, what's called the thoracic spine. And you can see that in this picture. You see this X-ray of her body, and this bright white is metal. That's screws and rods and hooks that the previous surgeon had implanted many years earlier. She actually did very well with that, and that lasted her a couple decades without problems. But then you see this part of the spine is straight, but then there's this curve developing underneath. And that was slowly getting worse over time. And it was causing her to lean over to one side, and she couldn't stand straight. And that was hurting her back, and it was hurting her leg when she walked. So this is one of the more complex problems we face in my field of how do we help these patients stand up straight, live their life, do their normal activities of daily living. And basically what we have to do is reconstruct the spine in order to straighten these curved areas by putting in screws and rods like this. So this was the surgery I planned. There's a lot of medical jargon here, and I'll just tell you kind of the overview was that in these cases we have to break the spine and put it back together in order to get rid of this curve that's a problem for this patient. On top of that, with her having these prior implants that are a generation ago, I as a surgeon have to figure out how am I going to interface with those in a safe way. Also, her anatomy is totally distorted by having had that prior surgery. She has scar tissue, bone has formed in different places, so I can't use my traditional thinking and landmarks that I would use if she had never had a surgery before. So this is the result of the surgery. These planning tools and surgeries tend to be actually very quantitative. We use things like this Cobb angle, which measures the angle between two different vertebrae. At a starting point, she had 33 degrees of curvature. And these images on the left are before surgery. You can see we calculate a lot of other angles in order to determine targets and what we want to achieve. And then this is after the surgery. You can see she kind of looks like she has an Eiffel Tower inside of her now with these new screws and rods that are connecting to the old ones. And now the bottom part of her spine is straight. And we've also improved the curvature so she can stand up straight, essentially. That's the goal. We want her to stand up straight so she can live her life and do the things that she wants to do. And this was actually a big difference for her. I remember a simple thing that she told me was she never used to be able to sit down at a basketball game and watch her son play, who was a teenager at that time. And she got that back, and that was a big deal for her. But again, this type of surgery is hard to do safely and presents a lot of challenges that we could do better with better technology. When we do use navigation, this is what it typically looks like. There's a screen in the room that has a pre-op scan that's displayed, and then the surgeon is looking away from the patient towards this screen, and the screen is trying to sync up what the surgeon is pointing to. This is current day technology, and the problem is you're looking away from the most important thing, which is the patient themselves and the things you want to target and what you want to avoid. So there's definitely a lot of room to improve on this. So with that, I'll hand it back to Gabe.
Cool, thank you. I think that really puts it in context of the kind of problem we're trying to solve. And I know there's a lot of technologists in the room, so you immediately went to, well, that's too much to ask a surgeon to process in their head. 3D to 2D to 3D transforms, real-time compute. Thankfully, we have some of these solutions for what's really a compute problem. So you've all seen many iterations of this. Of course, we know Moore's Law. We've watched it progress with many iconic computing platforms over time. Some of my favorites on here, IBM, Cray, Apple, Pentium, et cetera. And that's progressed, and now we have a future that likely includes quantum computing and maybe even some sort of DNA and biological computing mechanism. It's very exciting. We've also seen a little bit of the plateauing of Moore's Law and then an extension through GPUs. Our friends at NVIDIA and others have done a wonderful job of extending the computing performance and even into the future. The good thing is if you have GPUs or even cloud-based GPUs, that you actually have a lot of resources to throw at a problem like this. I'm going to do the evolution of surgery. Is that cool? Okay. I'll do this one very quickly just so we can roll through so we're on time. I think this is really interesting. Look back at 1895. This is actually the first X-ray that was taken. And this is in context of about 100, 125 years of progress. In 1900, they started doing brain surgeries. So a very famous surgeon at the time, started using magnets to try to track and remove shrapnel from the heads of soldiers. He was rewarded with being sent to the front line in World War I to do a lot of battlefield surgeries. ECG came along in 1903 approximately, the first surgical microscopes in the 1920s that then progressed into actually being used in the OR in the 1950s and 60s, a company called Zeiss, which many of you have heard of. What I think is really interesting is the secondary viewer here, not the binocular view, is essentially looking at a telescope with a monocular view, which means if Dr. Saigal is using a tool like this, I don't know exactly what he's seeing. And so the secondary surgeon who might be assisting couldn't really participate in the surgery to the degree they could today with an AR or VR headset. So very interesting benefit. Then ultrasound in the 1950s, CT scans gave us the ability to look at slices throughout the anatomy and actually start to do reconstructions of that in cranial surgeries and other applications. MRI then gave us the ability to look at vascular structures in the brain and elsewhere. And one thing you can see on this timeline is that a lot of progress occurred in especially imaging leading up to the 1980s, PET scans in the mid-80s. We are in the long tail, what I would call incremental innovation and application of these technologies, which were transformative at the time, but have been in the field for a while. And so we're in need of some big steps in progress in the space. So we've seen something like robotics start to take off. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Da Vinci system. But what I wanted to show you with this slide is that there are leading indicators that can tell you what's coming next in a paradigm shift in technology and in medicine. These are patent family applications going back to the 1990s. So the Da Vinci system was approved by FDA, cleared to be used in surgeries in 2000. But if you were looking, you could see those indications starting to show up in other places, both the white papers, technical papers, and also the patent applications. So it gives us something to look for. And then you see the clinical applications start to come many years later, right? Initially, it was 4 main robotic systems. Now this slide can't even encapsulate how many systems there are, both generalized surgical systems and very specific systems. Even the definition of robot has changed. You can put it in quotation marks. So you see company after company, product after product. Once the point has been proven and the regulatory environment has evolved, we've progressed very quickly. And we're sort of aiming to accelerate this progression. And now you see once that progression and commercialization and regulatory compliance occurs, now the market rewards that, right? And you see rapid growth over time, especially projecting out to 2025 in terms of the number of procedures, getting into the millions of robotic surgeries done per year, and then going globally, and then also the market value. I think Intuitive's market cap is 160 billion or something today. So what other leading indicators can we look for? One is machine learning related publications in these various spaces. So radiology started to move very quickly in about 2013, 2014, and you can see other specialties coming along. It makes sense that you would use machine learning for radiology scans and for oncology. And now we're seeing neuroimaging, ophthalmology coming along quickly. And in orthopedic surgery, Dr. Saigal's a neurosurgeon practicing alongside orthopedic surgeons often. We're starting to see these deep learning and machine learning techniques and tools applied quite broadly. But let me level set it back here. This is what we're dealing with, an extremely complex anatomical situation where you can't just throw an ML tool at a data set. You have to be very considerate, very thoughtful, and achieve some pretty high bars in terms of proof points. Want me to keep going? Okay. So how are we going to do this? First, we have to digitize the entire operative event, right? So let's first map it out. This is what's called a surgical workflow from pre-op to intra-op to post-operative. And linking these things is actually really difficult. So we've split it up and we've made it possible so that you can ingest something like a CT scan, slice by slice, drop it into an application that then uses machine learning to segment that out. Why is that important? Because giving Dr. Saigal a whole spine is not realistic. Giving him an image that is broken down pixel by pixel, segment by segment of the spine so it can move independently, like the patient you saw before who had a fused thoracic region but had issues in the lumbar. Well, those are moving somewhat independently, and he's got to process all those calculations himself. So we're steadily giving him more and better information. So we've segmented the spine, and now you can take that into a 3D modeling exercise. Here's ML running on that spine. So you can see the colored regions. That's a machine learning neural network-based algorithm that is segmenting out and differentiating the tissue around each portion of the spine. So Dr. Saigal can then use that to perform a better surgery and know where he is in space. So that's interesting, pulling ML into medicine. To find other technologies to apply in medicine, we have to look elsewhere, right? Who here knows anything about, or has heard of LiDAR? Who here has a Tesla? Who here wants a Tesla? Oh, come on, be honest. Who has an iPhone? Okay, if you have a recent iPhone, you probably have LiDAR on your phone, right? But this technology was developed so that we could land on the moon. It's very good at measuring the average distance from something like the Earth to the moon. But in using LiDAR to do so, to land Apollo successfully, we actually learned that light could be used to do something akin to volumetric imaging. We started to be able to thermally map the surface of the moon and then reconstruct these models, which are actually much more rich than we initially thought. You can do a lot more. Okay, interesting. That look familiar? That's a spine on a surgical bed using a different technology, but some similarities, to capture all of the information about the anatomy so that we can then do interesting and valuable things with it. But we've looked outside of medicine to find those technologies.
So in applying that type of technology, we want to talk about how can we digitize what I do to make it better for the patient, better for the surgeon, safer with better results. So again, we talked about this workflow, preoperatively getting a scan, digitizing the scan, overlaying that mixed reality system with the real anatomy so the surgeon can do it safely. So here's that concept being shown. This is a real-time rendering based on the system capturing the anatomy that's in front of the surgeon, and the surgeon then can both look live at the patient and also have the mixed reality system tell him where he is in space, which is really, really powerful and valuable. This is what this same type of thing would look like without that. And ideally, as a surgeon, I would like to combine all of the elements so that I can do the procedure as safely as possible. Currently, the way that we would typically do these is, this is an example of one segment of the spine. This is a vertebrae. We would put a clamp on a spinous process, which is the bump of bone that sticks out. And then with current imaging systems, there are, for example, robotic eyes that are looking at infrared sensors here. And I can touch different parts of the spine and get a sense on a computer monitor of where I am in space. But again, as I showed you earlier, that's with me looking away from the patient. And what I really want is to be able to look where I'm working and get that same real-time feedback. And to give you a sense of the importance of safety here, if the surgeon is putting in an implant and they go a little too much to the center and get in the spinal canal, they can cause a spinal cord injury. They go a little too far south, they can cause a nerve root injury. They go a little too deep, they can puncture the aorta, which can be fatal. So there's very small margins for error in any direction when we do these cases and putting these implants. And it's really important to have the safest technology possible. So here's an example of a surgeon using a mixed reality headset to look around. This is a prototype system, and you can see in the little monitor what he is envisioning. And he can basically use the mixed reality as a sort of 3D vision to see inside and through the spine exactly what are all the safe corridors for the type of surgery that he is planning.
Thank you. Just let that sink in for a second. The kind of real-time volumetric feedback and intelligence that the physician is getting compared to looking at a X-ray scan on a screen across the room that might as well have been generated 30 years ago, right? We've come a long way in surgery, but what you just saw is a tremendous leap forward in what we can offer. It is a lot of data. So it's approximately 50 gig per hour of data is captured using a system like that in surgery. Just to give it some reference, it varies based on capacity and number of neurons and pathways and everything, but a human brain can handle about 2.5 petabytes of storage capacity of data. So you're talking about in 1 year of usage of a system like that, you're essentially filling up a human brain, which means you can't do it on your own. You need help and compute to do that really, really well. You want to take this one? Sure.
So here's an example, again, this is an image of a spine, and what you see in gold are screws that a surgeon would be implanting. And you can see the The blue would be a target that the surgeon has planned and they're aiming towards the target. So a surgeon could use this type of mixed reality to, again, see inside of and through the spine with real-time rendering in case the patient moves, in case the spine moves, or some event happens, which is extremely powerful. And here's an example of a test that we ran looking at freehand, which you'll see on the right. And you see there were a number of errors on the order of millimeters where the tip of the screw is several millimeters away from the target. This is navigated using that older technology, which is a little bit better. And then here is in the center is using that mixed reality system. And you can see that the screws end up right on target. And all with sub-millimeter accuracy. And here is the same type of test, just seen from a different angle, so you can see multiple at the same time. You can see when these are done freehand, again, a number of errors. Some are more accurate than others, but many times where the surgeon in this test environment was off by several millimeters, and that addition of mixed reality ultimately allows the same procedure to be done much safer, where essentially every screw is hitting the target exactly where we want it to be. So, you know, in conclusion, we're really witnessing an unprecedented time for the development of technology and its use in medicine. And it's a really exciting time to be working in this field. There's such a big opportunity to do the things that we do now better, more safely, and ultimately lead to better outcomes for our patients. And really, we feel like this is only the beginning.
Great. Thank you. We're happy to stick around for some questions, and you know, very minimal solicitation, but we need partners to do this. Not one company or one physician can achieve this. So if you'd like to talk to us afterwards, we're really building this. We're based in Seattle. Proprio is a growing company, and even have some folks in the Bay Area now. So happy to take some questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the complexity of surgery. So do you need FDA approval for this kind of technology, or you just can use it without approval?
Yes, absolutely. You can basically assume anything that goes in the operating room needs some sort of approval, which makes sense, right? In this case, it's not the same sort of path as like a therapeutic, you know, de novo with 10,000 people in a study. There's a process for the FDA to approve technologies like this called 510K. But absolutely, there's a process for approval. That depends on who you ask. I think FDA has come, just very honestly, not just blowing smoke. FDA has come really, really far on the focus on different technologies. They're, even before the pandemic, hosting annual and semi-annual summits on AI, robotics, AR, VR. So very much standing on the shoulders of giants who have come before us, including Da Vinci and the Intuitive Surgical team. I'd say this, again, regulatory-wise, this is the time to be doing these kind of things.
Can you talk about the technology that you're using to collect the real-time data and how that works?
Yeah, the LiDAR thing was sort of a cute misdirection, but cool to see how you can pull things from other applications, right? If you want to look into light field rendering, is actually a technology that was initially developed somewhat at Stanford here in the 90s. If you're very nerdy, there's a paper called the Lumograph paper. Concept is sort of like a bug's eye. So imagine either multiple cameras or single camera with a lens on it that is similar to a bug's eye that refracts light from slightly different angles, maybe from the same scene. So fast forward 25 years or so, lots of really, really smart people working on that for many applications. A lot of them are really focused on, as you can imagine, social media and making avatars and mapping the face. A very distant cousin of this technology is in your iPhone 10 and later. And then the 13 now has some LiDAR built in. But the image reconstruction, if you can imagine, what if you had 20 eyes? They were all kind of in a sphere looking at the same scene and then reconstructing that, is computationally very challenging. So if you asked what is our secret sauce, we've figured that kind of difficult computational problem out. Light field is the name of that. Please.
So you mentioned the FDA process 510K. Has Proprio submitted for 510K yet?
There's a fairly large disclaimer I need to put up here. We are in that process right now, so you'll hear more about that very soon. We feel pretty good about it, though. I've talked a lot. Dr. Saigal is a fairly rare practitioner. If you have any questions for him about impacts to his practice or anything, please feel free to ask either one of us.
Are you using mixed reality at this point other than those little goggles?
Yeah, it's very nostalgic for me to come back here. I was here in 2016 and 17. There's a company called Vario, which was working on their first prototype, XR1 at the time. They've come amazingly far since then. So we've basically, over time, tested every type of AR, VR, MR you can imagine. I'll let the surgeon speak, but for us, we tried pass-through cameras and all of that and presented all these prototypes to many doctors, hundreds of doctors. And the feedback we got was, I want to see with my naked eye that I trust and do my own sort of depth perception on that for the anatomy. And then I want a heads-up display or be able to go back and forth and overlay where I want to overlay, but not obstruct my vision, which is a difficult problem in AR and VR, right? If you're in AR and the brightness isn't enough, then it's going to look messy, and that's the last thing you want in surgery. But you can display a number of things up above and kind of move those things around. I'll tell you the other thing that we got wrong for developers out there was you have to give the surgeon the right information in the right way at the right time. Otherwise, they're going to be, I don't want to speak for you, but get it out of my view. I've got something very important to do. Do you want to speak at all to that?
Sure. So first of all, we're not using mixed reality in practice in the operating room now. There's a handful of demonstrations for research purposes, a few publications of people using augmented or some sort of mixed reality to try to solve this as one problem of putting in screws in a spine or different types of medical problems. But that is by no means everyday practice or in general use. It's really just at the research phase. I would totally echo what Gabe said in terms of what will be useful to me as a surgeon. I think we're really far away from a surgeon feeling comfortable not seeing the operative field at all. I'm nowhere close to that, and I really want exactly what he said, which is an overlay or some sort of mixed reality where I can see the operative field directly with my own eyes, and I know I can trust that, and then some extra information added on top of that can be very valuable. Again, this concept of like 3D vision. So I can see the surface with my own eyes, but I can't see through it. But part of the art of what I do is trying to have that sense of 3D vision when you can't. And now with the technology, we can actually have that because we can scroll through and look inside of the spine in that virtual space on top of what we're seeing from just a surface perspective.
There was some other really cool technology we saw here several years ago, which was eye tracking, which is now quite pervasive, which is awesome. You see some very interesting research out there pointing cameras at surgeons' eyes. And one of the delineations you see is they can actually determine, based on the data with a high degree of confidence, the level of experience and expertise of the surgeon based on what they look at for how long in the scene. So it's a little counterintuitive. An experienced surgeon like Dr. Saigal will go to the most important point in the scene and then look around to get situational awareness, whereas a less experienced surgeon will look for situational awareness to zero in on the most important thing in the anatomy. So it actually happens sort of backwards, but you can see it reflected in the data. So that's particularly interesting when you put a headset on a surgeon, track everything, and can actually make some of these inferences over time, can indicate and actually change the way that you design the UI and what you show a physician at a particular moment. It's really valuable. Nope.
So you showed the 3D model of the spine as it was being adjusted. My question is, can you visualize in 3D space anything that is segmented? So like if I pulled up an MRI and segmented a tumor, would it be visualized in 3D space like the spinal fluid?
Yeah, so like with a caveat that soft tissue and hard tissue sounds like you have some experience in imaging, are different fundamentally, and you want to use different modalities, obviously MRI versus CT, right? Hard tissue and soft tissue are different, and there's a registration and co-registration issue. But with those caveats, yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the breakthrough that we're bringing to market is the idea that you could image both hard and soft tissue and operate on either or both, which is sort of a holy grail for surgery. If you can kind of transcend hard and soft tissue, that means you can do ortho, you can do neuro, you can do lots of other applications too. Sure. I don't see any more hands, but we'll be around if you want to ask some more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.